person. And I can distinctly remember at a parent-teacher conference in early elementary, my teacher complained to her that I didn't color things the colors that they were supposed to be. And she told them that art is subjective, and I was doing it right, and they were doing it wrong. And then I can remember being in late elementary school, and it's that phase where people draw the little sun in the corner, and my classmates would draw blue clouds on a white sky because it would take too long to color the sky blue. And I would just get so annoyed by that. I'd be like, no, that's wrong. You have to take the time to do it the right way. And then it was funny because by the time I got to the end of my BFA, my he was my printmaking professor, but it was painting class, suddenly looked out into the room and said, whatever happens to the girl who draws horses? The one who draws horses all the time, what happens to her? And I was like, you were the girl who draws horses? And I was like, yes. He goes, oh good, she does become a real artist. So it's the way my brain works. It's just what I do. I was lucky to find it.
Did you have exposure to galleries and museums?
No. I did do a extracurricular summer art course that my school district did, that I remember them taking us to a couple of galleries at Spoleto, the Gibbs, I remember us going to. But other than that, no. Now, my family, my sister danced, and so I went to a lot of dance performances. My mother loved to watch ballet, and so we would be very likely to go see a performance. But I never had any formal art training, not in high school, or went to any gallery. I had no idea that the world existed that I live in and move in now until I went to undergrad.
So what put you on the path to thinking of art as a viable professional career?
I never thought about it. I just did it. I'm sorry. It's just like it never occurred to me to do something else. And so...
Not even a different choice of study?
No. I was infatuated with SCAD and wanted to go there and study sequential art and go into comics and animation like every 18-year-old girl ever does that's interested in drawing. But I had a full scholarship to Winthrop. And at Winthrop at that time, the foundation year was always the same. You would always take, it doesn't matter what. So I was declared as an illustration major because that was the closest thing to what I had wanted to study at SCAD. But the first year, the first 2 semesters for everybody was exactly the same. And so I was in the final, working on my final for my drawing 2 class, and had just worked on my schedule for the fall of my sophomore year, and was really annoyed that I had to take typography because illustration was a graphic design course, and I'm like, I only have 8 semesters, 3 classes, so I only have 24 studio classes before I graduate, and I have to waste one of them on typography. And so this is what I'm thinking. No offense to the graphic designers, but that's what I was thinking. And my teacher looked at me and said, why aren't you a fine arts major? And I was like, why aren't I a fine arts major? So I immediately went to the department office, turned in the paperwork to change my major from art to even more art, declared a general studio because I had no idea what I wanted to study. I couldn't make my mind up. It was drawing and painting is what I declared. And then I called my mom and was like, hey guys, I changed my major from art to even art. Yeah.
It's interesting that you would have an opposition to typography, and text has become such an important part of how you make your practice today.
Yeah, I don't think that it was an opposition to typography. I think it's that I was so new to art that I wanted to experience ceramics. I wanted to experience printmaking. I wanted to experience more painting. I wanted to experience more drawing. And the way that the typography class was presented, what I had seen at that point, just wasn't as give me as all of the other medias were.
There's another really early connection from something you said a moment ago about drawing in the blue sky, and how important it was that you take the time to do it right. And that's the way I think of most printmakers.
Yeah.
This kind of this attraction to this very meticulous tedious, time-based art.
Yes, and that's very much something I do. And the program I found myself in when I was studying, I was under Paul Martica, if any of you are familiar with him. And so he preached the gospel. He was the head of printmaking and also taught painting at Winthrop University. Very meticulous craftsperson, and he taught a gospel, really, of what it is to be an artist. And one of those foundational tenets was, it doesn't matter how long it takes, you give the work what the work needs. And the fifth grader in me who would get annoyed with her classmates for saying it would take too long to color the whole sky blue, you could just color the clouds blue, took to that a little too hard, I think. It's good for the work, but not for the work-life balance. So I do think that is one of the hallmarks of my work, though, is that the amount of time it takes to do something. And I'm looking at the pieces I have in the show, but I'm also thinking of some of the pieces that didn't make it for one reason or another. And the willingness to put a few thousand hours of work into a piece is something that I don't shy away from to this day. And that is a printmaker kind of thing.
So you find the foundation in printmaking. At what point does your work start to eclipse the boundaries of what it means to be a printmaker? When does the printmaking become collage? When does it become installation?
Well, see, that's the thing about it, is that I didn't start in printmaking. I started in painting, and then drawing. And printmaking is just drawing backwards with more steps. And when it doesn't matter what media I'm working in, I think it all goes back to a foundational consideration of drawing and collage. The way I approach painting isn't as painterly, I think, as some painters do. There is a emphasis on line and mark, I think, that speaks more to the printmaking and the drawing. And as you look through the whole body of work, you see the repetition of compositional elements. And so you can see, I think, how when I approach creation of a composition, I'm looking at my past body of work and creating collage compositionally from previous pieces that I've done. So I think I'm always drawing, and I just think that the printmaking takes a predominance because of the way it lets me engage with process. It lets me repeat, the repeatability, the existence of the multiple, lets me work in modules to create things like the installation. And so it serves as, I think, a very strong backbone for a multidisciplinary approach because it lends itself to everything else that I do.
So your paintings are less painterly, you're drawing, but there is a general concern about materiality in your work.
Yeah.
So that even in the paper-based works, you are getting a sense of what the paper means, and you are starting to create tangible objects that mimic what's happening in the printmaking. So talk a little about your desire to find a balance between what is drawn and what is a concern for materiality.
I think that does go back to the printmaker in me, because for a printmaker, the paper is the print. There's not a divorce between the image and the substrate. So when I talk to my painter friends, the canvas holds the painting, and that's its purpose, but the canvas isn't as predominant as when you're doing a print. You really consider what are the material qualities of this print, and how do they continue to evoke what I'm trying to do in this. Is it best served by a very delicate paper, or is it best served by something very stiff and heavy? And so I stopped thinking of paper as a two-dimensional thing, because even if it's flat, it is an object. A sheet of paper is an object. And I also, because I became so much of a printmaker, like because it became so central to my practice, I started thinking about, first it was sour grapes, because I didn't have access to any of the fun new technology, the laser cutters and the CNC routers that everybody was so excited about. And so I started thinking more about what does it mean to make a print. And I decided that the printmaking, with the advent of these digital technologies, similar place that painting was when the photography was developed. Because photography freed painting from being about depicting the world, and then painting went off and did its own amazing things. And so the laser cutter, the CNC router, the digital printing frees printmaking from being about disseminating information. So now what does it mean for it to exist in the multiple? And for me, that opened it up to installation, to sculpture, to the print as an object, the paper as an object, and so that's the way I've been following it since then.
It seems to me that even outside the print, when the work moves away from the flat surface, it's still about disseminating information. Your work to me,
Right.
even the very three-dimensional work, moves in a very narrative fashion.
Yeah.
Talk about the importance of narrative in your work.
I think that the role of art, I saw this random quote on Instagram. It was one of those like little things that gets shared, who knows the source. But it said that the thing about art is that you can feel very alone in your suffering. But then you read a story and you realize that 100 years ago that same thing happened to the author of that story. Or you can see a painting and you can realize that 50 years ago the struggle that I'm feeling now, the person who painted this felt that struggle.
I think
So
that's
it
a
makes
Baldwin.
you-
I think that's a bastardization of a
Sounds like
Baldwin quote.
It was a bastardization, but it was a beautiful thing. And at the end of the day, I think that making art is about observing and reporting. And the particularities of my own sufferings, I think, are only important to me and the people who love me on a personal level. But they are also sufferings that most people, if they haven't experienced the flavor of it, will. And when you're going through it, you feel very alone. And when you're going through it, the world is giving you platitudes. And they're telling you everything happens for a reason, and everything has a silver lining, and everything will be okay, and it's not really that bad. And so within my work, I can create a place where you can exist without that platitude, and you can see your own interpretation of what happened in that. Then maybe you'll feel a little bit less alone, and then we can connect there. And so all of my work, the narrative within my work, is me trying to be honest with my own state of experience with loss, with grief, with generational trauma, with how I'm passing on trauma in my own daughters. Hopefully it's a different flavor than the ones I was served, but there's no way I'm gonna get out of this life without, without hurting them, because you never get over sharing a body. You can't be that close and not hurt each other. And so what you see, the reason things repeat, the reason the narrative loops is because, and my husband can tell you, I, like a dog in a kennel, walk the same path until there's ruts in my mental landscape. And I'm trying to record that as authentically as I can, and then put it here so that if you recognize the ruts, maybe you feel like you're not walking alone. If that makes sense?
So the ruts in the work are the symbols that you've chosen?
Yes.
And let's talk about those.
Okay. Just in general, or do you have one in particular?
Let's jump in. There are animals,
Yes.
tools.
Yes.
Tools are consistent. Depictions of flesh,
Yes.
not necessarily whole bodies, but depictions of flesh, both
Yes.
decaying and rotting animal flesh and bruised and decaying human flesh.
Yes. So I am really interested in the predator-prey relationship of raptors, birds in particular, and so much of my work is about kind of that struggle of living. And I find that talon and claw to be a place that I can explore that in the moment of impact, the moment of strike, the kinetic energy you have of these birds as they're coming in. A lot of people think of birds as kind of like symbols of freedom or song or spring or joy, but I feel like through the choices of birds I work with, I take it to a different place. As far as the tools go, I think that you have to be responsible for your own healing. You're not responsible for what happened to you, but you are responsible for how you have responded to it. And so you have to suture yourself. You can't rely on somebody else to come in and do it for you. And so the tools that I depict are tools of knotting and unknotting, and they are tools of pulling, and they are tools of suturing, and the embroidery scissors above all else. And so the embroidery scissors, I learned that embroidery scissors are stork-shaped because they were originally used in midwifery. And they were used for cutting flesh, they were used for cutting cords, they were used for labor. And over time, they became associated with embroidery because what is a midwife going to do while she waits for labor to progress? Babies come on their own time. She's going to work on her embroidery. And so then the process of birth became more industrial, I guess, more, of the hospital. And trust me, I was very grateful for my epidural. I'm not here advocating home births. But very medicated childbirth with both my children, and thank you for that. Thank you, science. But I became fascinated by the idea of scissors. First of all, I use scissors a lot within my own practice as a tool to create art. But then I started thinking more about the idea of cutting. And so you cut away things that don't serve you. Cutting is destructive, but it is also curative. You have to cut yourself free of the things that can trap you. And then a lot of my things go back to this mother-daughter relationship.
There seems to me to be a heavy emphasis on this gendered role of the mother, and also the kind of gendered art making, the embroidery.
The women's work idea. So, man, textiles are having such a resurgence right now, aren't they? They're like the hip thing. God, so many men are doing it, right? Why did it get to be so cool once the guys were doing it? When the women were doing it, it was craft, but when the guys are doing it, it's drawing. I think there's a little bit about this rebelling, because there's this idea, thankfully not as prevalent now, but there has been an idea in the art world for a long time that you cannot be a mother and have a serious art career, that one precludes the other. So the whole essay of the Praying in the Hallway is something that I felt like I've knocked against. Less now, but more when I was just out of grad school, when my daughter was being born. My mother died before my daughters were born, so I never had the experience of being a mother and a daughter at the same time, but I've experienced both. And I've seen the complications of both of those relationships in different ways. And then I was 5 months pregnant during my last semester of grad school. I don't recommend that, right? But I had a baby shower thrown for me by my graduate cohort, and it was great. It was a lovely little baby shower. One of my best friends organized it. They got me all the things that you get at baby showers, except for this one guy who was a painter. Goes, Adrian, I had no idea what to get for a baby, but I know you use a lot of matte medium. So I got you a jar of matte medium, and he wrapped it, right? And he gave it to me, and he's like, I didn't know what's babies, but you use matte medium because you do matte media transfers, so here's some matte medium. After my daughter was born, the world told me I didn't exist anymore. Adrian was gone, I was now mother. And a good mother gives up everything for her children. And you as an individual are completely erased. And it took me over a year to find my way back to myself. But I actually held on to that bottle of wrapped matte medium like a lodestone, because it helped me remember. So I did have a very gendered experience, I think, of the idea of motherhood and the role of mother in our society, which is deified and vilified in equal measure, while also eliminating the woman that you are completely. A mother is both the most important and the least important person in every family, it seems like, traditionally. is like what we lean towards. And I think navigating that experience and how do I hold on to my humanity and not just be consumed by this archetype of mother. And then I think about my daughters, and I think about how if I want them, if they choose to have children, I don't want them to lose themselves. So, to mother. So the best way that I can do that, give them a lodestone against that, is if I continue to be me. So basically I have to leave them for everybody's betterment. I'll come back. I'll always come back. But I've got to go. I have to be Adrian first and Mom second. And I think that's why it comes out, because I leave them and then I miss them.
So there is this juxtaposition of direct violence
Yes.
and caregiving.
And caregiving. Yeah. So the violence, I think it goes back to that idea that you have to suture yourself. And I have not been subjected to physical violence. So that's not what I'm depicting. But I deal with a lot of emotional trauma, parentification, in a lot of ways, interactions I had with my parents, interactions I had with my siblings, my sisters, and then my own struggles with mental health have gone to some pretty dark places in the last few years. And so I depict the violence of the flesh as a way to talk about the emotional landscape in a visceral form, if that makes any sense. And so I am wounded. The paintings are wounded, the drawings are wounded, the bruises are wounded. And can I depict, there was a girl in my undergrad, her name was Gloria, and I remember her topic all through our undergrad was she would paint wounds, she would paint gangrenous, fleshy bruises, like just she would paint wounds. And she would talk about wanting to depict it so beautifully that people saw the beauty before the wound. And she later killed herself. And I think about Gloria a lot. And in some of the work that I've done, I thought I was thinking about her a lot more than I should have. So I think that, I don't want to say I'm picking it up from her, but I think about her posing that question a lot. And then I've since dealt with death and loss. And I'm not a spiritual person, so none of the spiritual platitudes of death and loss work for me. There are no silver linings. Nothing happens for a reason. But there's still, I think, beauty left over. So can I present a visceral depiction of my emotional wounding? And can I present a beautiful image of mortality that isn't asking to be explained away and is allowed to exist? And I think that's what I'm trying to do with both of those ideas.
Before you were exploring grief, what were you exploring?
I don't know, because it's been with me for so long. There wasn't a before I was exploring grief. I graduated with my BFA in 2005, and my mom died less than 3 years later. It was like 2 years later.
Was it intentional, or did you wake up one day and realize that you had a body of work, years of practice that focused on grief?
That's what it was. And it's self-introspection. So it's really easy to lie to yourself about what you're doing. And if you do that, the work is stunted. And you just make the same thing over and over again. Yes, I know I make the same thing over and over again, but it's different, okay? I'm doing it on purpose. It's the difference. It just didn't sit with me. And so actually, it was when I was in grad school. I take that back, I was in grad school. And up until that point, I swore I was a formalist. I'm a formalist. I am a formalist. And we had to give a presentation and show our work and talk about our work. And so I finished, and everybody's looking at me. I'm like, what? And they go, you're full of shit, Adrian. There's nothing formal about what what you're doing. You need to journal. You need to get up one morning before anybody else in your house, and you need to just pencil and paper, don't type it, journal. And that day I did probably 8 or 9 pages of just like, it just poured out. And then I looked and I went, oh, that's what's going on here. And so ever since then, I've tried for that self-honesty, because I take what I do, my studio practice is my spiritual practice, and so I take it with that amount of seriousness. That's the place it takes in my life. And so if I am lying to myself about what I'm doing, what's the point of doing it? So I've gotta look in those ugly places to pull them out.
Talk to us a little about what your process is. So you've made a body of work that includes sculpture, painting, print, collage, performance, textile. So installation, did I mention installation?
Installation,
Right.
yeah.
So what's the process? Is there research first? Is there drawing? Are you journaling first? Where do you start a body of work?
I think it mostly comes from undiagnosed ADHD, and I jump from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing, searching for that dopamine that I can get. And I don't work on one piece at a time, but I'm looking at all of the work that I'm doing. Everything that I do is sketchbook. And then when I go to do a print, I'm looking back at all of the paintings and all the collages. So in my mind, I don't see a divide between the different media. It's how do I next present this? And what does it mean? Maybe I do see different media. What does it mean to see the osprey this big as a painting, and then to see the osprey a fraction of the size as a lithograph? What does the presentation of the painting have that says something different than what the lithograph says?
No divide between material or processes, but is there a divide between bodies of work? Because if you really look at what you've produced as a professional artist, there are through lines. There are things that jump from one body to another.
Yeah.
So is there a division, or is it just one long story that you are connecting by time?
I think that there are a few divisions, but they're more like chapters and they are separate things because they are so interconnected. The pandemic, I did the book pages. I did it completely different. Like my practice completely changed for a little bit because of the necessity of what happened. Physically, I couldn't go to a print studio. I couldn't go to my painting studio, not because it was closed down to me, but because I was teaching printmaking online at 2 different universities. I had a 3rd grader that was doing distance learning, and then I was taking care of 2 3-year-olds, mine and my niece, who were doing online 3K. Let me tell y'all, online 3K for 2 kids is actually better than online 3rd grade. Yeah, online 3rd grade is probably the hardest out of all those, but I had to change my work because everything else had changed. And then, so I was working on these kind of like found poetry book pages, and then I realized that they weren't actually about the pandemic, they were about the same things I'd always been working on. And so then I had a whole body of work spring out from that. And then I think when I went to McCall, I really had the chance. I'd been thinking about some different media and kind of, I go through phases of research and material and idea and skills. And then after incubating for a little bit, I explode a whole bunch of work. And so when I went to McCall, I was there for 14 weeks. And I was working 60-hour weeks in my studio. And I had every piece of equipment that I could want. And I had people who knew how to use all of them. So it didn't matter that I didn't know how to fire a kiln. All I needed to know was how to make the mold and pour the slip. And so with the opportunity to do that, that's when I became fully convinced that I have undiagnosed ADHD, because I would spiral in my studio between different stations I had set up, and it was dizzying. Some days I couldn't focus. I just pinged back and forth between the drawing and painting print studios, like this constantly, and hyper-focus and obsess, like about. You would see me one project or another process for 3 or 4 days and then do something completely different. But it let the work grow together in a way that it had not had a chance to grow together before, because I could see it all at the same time in the same room, as opposed to working on it. Here's my painting, here's my printmaking, here's where I'm starting color and ceramics. And so it really allowed it to cross-pollinate into, I think, a new thing.
I'm going to come back to that. I want you to talk a little about the importance of residencies and support for artists. But
Absolutely.
Before we get there,
Okay.
is the work memoir?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It's all a self-portrait and it's all an autobiography.
Will there ever be a moment? I mean, I think there are moments now that are fiction,
Yes.
right? So,
Or embellished.
right.
Yeah.
So, is it more important that you are telling the true story of what's happened, or is it more important that you are developing a mythology around these events that present certain kinds of truths?
The mythology is more important. It has to come from a place of actual experience. I won't do something that I don't feel like comes from a genuine place of actual experience. And I am mining certain elements of my own personal, like the cat's cradle is very much a uniquely personal symbol. But I don't think that the details of my autobiography are going to be interesting to anybody that didn't come out of my body in 50 years. But we all encounter this mythology. Like, we all encounter these situations. And so I think that it is the mythology of it. It needs to begin in autobiography, and it is autobiographical, and it is a personal narrative. But the mythology is more important than I am as an individual. The story of Adrian isn't nearly as important as the mythology. Yeah.
So, back to the residencies.
Yeah.
I got to know your work and you when you were the recipient of a 701 residency.
Yes.
And that was an interesting period too, because it was not quite post-pandemic, it was not quite the beginning of the pandemic, but you were very isolated making this body of work. But you had the same opportunity here that you had at McCall Center, and that you could set up these stations of work and move between them. So talk about the value of a residency in programs like 701 CCA and programs like McCall Center for supporting what an artist can do.
And Ramona, which is what I'm doing at the end of the summer, which is a really exciting residency that I'm looking forward to participating in. The space is important, but the most important thing is the time. Because when I'm doing a residency, I don't have to take Phoebe to base. I don't have to take Sophie to swim. And I'm not thinking about the sink full of dishes. My only obligation is to make it work. And so it allows me the chance to do the work. And I don't mean like just to make the painting. In a lot of ways, I'm thinking about all my residencies. My residency at 7-1 was that strange, isolated, post-pandemic experience. But I think a lot of that wasn't because of the pandemic. I think a lot of that's just me. And when I do a residency, I almost go into seclusion with the work for the duration of the residency. When I've done the winter residency at Penland, I would go up on, you go up on top of the mountain for 2 weeks, and I would do 14-hour days in the litho studio. I did 11 editions of lithographs in 10 days, which is, if you're familiar with lithography, insane. I would pass out, and then I would get up and I would go work. And I was doing that. There were days when I was at 701 that I didn't leave my studio for 3 or 4 days straight, because the studio at 701, your sleeping quarters look down on the studio, and then the kitchen looks into the studio. So you're eating and sleeping in the studio. And I would go 3 or 4 days, and the only voice that I would hear other than mine would be when I would call him. And then when I was at McCall, I've got a couple people from McCall here. How was I at McCall? Even though I had a cohort, they would come drag me out to go to dinner every now and then. But I think that part of me I'm always making, There's very rarely a day that I don't do at least a little something, but the residency allows me this kind of, you know what, it goes back to that, the studio is my spiritual practice. It allows me to go into this deep meditation about the work, and it's an experience that I can't get in my day-to-day life. I have to go to that removed place in order to go into that depth of thinking.
Is the work that you produce during these periods of meditation different, or is it just that you can do more of it in a more focused way?
Yeah.
But does it influence the kind of things that you're making?
Yes, because you can't work that big if you don't have walls big enough to hold both of those canvases. And I could put both of those in my little studio in Hartsville, but I didn't have a 30-foot wall to hang two 7.5-foot canvases on. So the ability to have the space, to have the workout in conversation, does cause it to be more intense and more, it's always going to echo, but the work itself is different when you're working in that kind of high intensity environment as opposed to when you're working on a few pieces or wrapped around the rest of your life and your obligations to other people.
So the 701 residency was working towards an exhibition, a solo exhibition.
Yep.
Although you were not obligated to produce work, there is this kind of expectation that you're making work for an exhibition.
Right.
McCall said there's a little freer.
Yeah.
You have stipend to make work, but you are not obligated in any way.
And Penland, the winter residency of Penland was make work, but make work without purpose. You're expected to be making, but it wasn't with the goal of an exhibition at the end. It was be in the studio and see what happens. Yeah.
How important is that kind of freedom?
I don't know that it registers for me personally, because I think I'm always working towards an exhibition.
What about experimentation? Is there a kind of freedom that you receive when you are given an opportunity, provided with material support and space? Is there a kind of experimentation that happens that you can't do on your own?
Yes. Yes, and I think that's I think the biggest example was that when I was at McCall, I had the space to figure out the ceramics because of how long it was and because I had all the equipment and all the space and then the knowledge to do it. 701 is where I started working big with textile. And so the same thing I think happened there. So I do think there is an element of that. A residency gives you a place to bring a new media into the overall body, because some of these things are so physically intense that the idea of trying to figure it out at home is too overwhelming with the demands of life, regular, every day. So I couldn't figure out the big textile soft sculptures without having that residency experience to give me the space to figure it out. And I wouldn't have been able to figure out the ceramics if I didn't have the time. And it's not just physical space, it's also the mental space to get into it and make some really bad batches of slip and make some really bad castings, and then have the chance to work through the research part of the materials until I started getting some things together and figure out where it landed.
Talk about Ramona.
Okay, so Ramona is a residency program in Houston. This is its second year. It's a really new program. It was started by a McCall alum. And you must be a mother of minor children to participate. You must have children under the age of 18. And it's not for fathers, it's just for mothers, so you have to be female identifying. And the idea is to provide space, material support, and facilitate curator visits. Because a lot of times caregivers are cut off from the residency experience because most of them are very long in duration. And some are, 701 was very welcoming of my family when they would come to see me. McCall was very welcoming of my family when they would come to see me. But some most residency programs say, no children, no families. You are here, and if you can't be here for 6 months, then you can't come. And so Ramona says it's a pushback against the pram in the hallway. And it says we are going to provide curator engagement. We are going to create connections between the art community in Houston and the women who are coming in to do this. We're going to make a residency that is short enough that they can leave to come to it, but long enough that they can get real work done. They provide a small but existent stipend towards childcare. You can bring your children with you, and they can stay with you, and they'll help you arrange childcare there. Or you can leave your children at home and use the stipend to help pay for childcare at home, whichever best serves you. And I think that it's very exciting to see a residency program so strongly embrace the fact that mothers are creators.
Yeah, I wanted to spend a minute just kind of talking about how we provide material support to artists, makers, and encourage everyone to kind of support the institutions in your community that are doing that. Here, 701, the Columbia Museum of Art, there are new spaces popping up all the time. Rock Bottom Studios, Ron Hagel's space, Gemini. Support local institutions, support the artists that they support. Before we move on, though, I want to open it up. Allow anyone else who has questions to ask of Adrian to jump right in.
Adrian, first of all, thank you for this beautiful exhibition and for being vulnerable in your talk today. I'm curious, I know you said you work on several pieces at once, but I am curious if you could kind of walk us through a chronological flow of the work in here.
No, sorry, there's not one. Time blindness and the cross of them is just too much. And I really, how do I say that it's nonlinear. Mm-hmm. It's so nonlinear. I can't walk you through the chronology. I did the Osprey painting before I did the Osprey litho. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But maybe even like, okay, so you did the Osprey painting, and then what was it that said, oh, now I need to do a litho with this?
I don't know. My gut.
Yeah.
So, and here's the thing, that I look at my practice, and I see a brightly lit path that goes from the painting to the print to the sculpture. I see, and it is so brightly lit that it feels completely obvious, and everybody who sees it is going to be like, this is absolutely trite and so obvious at the way she gets from point A to point B. But then if anybody sees it, they go, how the heck did you do that? That jump is crazy. So I don't know, other than I love litho, and I love painting, and I love etching, and I love woodcut, and I love the textile, and I love the sculpture. And I love each of them for the experience I have of manipulating the material, and I love each of them for the way they look different. And so it's like, I want to hug that bird. Like, I'm not a pet person, and I don't like animals, sorry. I don't want them in my house, but I want that particular osprey to be my best friend. I just want to put my arms around his neck and hug it. But I don't feel that way about the little one. I don't know. It's different. The experience of doing it in litho is different than the experience of doing it. And I get enough variation between the material experiences that I can keep the imagery the same. And it's still completely different. So I get that dopamine. Piece of dopamine.
So you were talking about your process of being in the studio and how that is a spiritual thing for you. Mm-hmm. And I can relate to it as well. Like, could you talk about maybe how, like when you step the first time when you stepping in for the day, when you stepping into that space, how that makes you feel and how that really drives what you really want to do?
Well, I think I realized a long time ago that I'm not a believer. So So when I say it's a spiritual practice, I don't mean in conversation with the deity. But I think what it does is drive me to continue to practice when the practice is hard, to continue to show up in the studio, and to show up when I'm not in the mood for it. Because if I talk to somebody who is devout, whatever the flavor of their devoutness is, they'll have days when they just don't feel like it, but they go and do it anyway. And then, there's days where I feel like mailing it in, and there's days that are like the high holy days of making, where I take it much more seriously. But I just think that predominantly it drives me, I think, to try to be honest in my introspection, and to allow myself to be vulnerable in the work, and hope that you find value in what I find there.
I would say the similarity there is in ritual.
In rituals,
So-
yes, that's
so
it.
what is your ritual?
I would have made a wonderful Catholic because I'm all about ritual and guilt. Okay, and I like wine. When I was at McCall, I would start each day with the bruise drawing. But other than that, I don't really have this is how I go through the steps of my practice whenever I go into it. I think the ritual comes in the material engagement. So it is viewing embroidery as a meditative process. It is viewing lithography as an alchemical process. It is in asking myself, what does this quality of paint mean as paint pushed on surface? I was very deeply moved and marked by my undergraduate experience with Marika. And I was a general studio major, so even back then I couldn't make up my mind on what I wanted to do. But I remember very distinctly he would talk about, the idea is one thing, but what does it mean as a painting? What does it mean as a drawing? You draw the word out like that, drawing. What does it mean as an etching? And so that idea that there is a truth in the material and the process of manipulating material. So in a way, everything that I do is a performance. You just see the record of it. So it's an engagement with the paint, it's an engagement with the stone, it's an engagement with the plate or the paper or the textile. And embroidery is a meditative process. It is a long, slow process. A lot of what I do is a long, slow process. And we live in a society that doesn't like that. We don't like grief, we don't like death, we don't like slow. If you stop at the stoplight, the billboards around you are going to change before the light does, because we don't have the attention span to sit through an intersection. And if something were to happen to my husband, society expects me, they'll give me 3 weeks to fall apart. In 3 months, I'm supposed to have it together, and by the end of the year, I should be dating again, right? Isn't that the way the timeline people put on it? People are so scared to not be okay that they don't allow a place for you to not be okay. And so I think that if I'm creating work that is meditative and slow, and I'm creating work about grief and trauma, but I'm creating work that is slow, then I have to sit with that for the duration of the creation of that work. That is a rebellion against the society that tells me I'm not supposed to take time with things, or that bad things can just be bad things without having to have a redemptive quality to them.
I saw a hand in the back.
Yeah.
One thing I love about form art is I see things in it, and I was just curious: is that a mouth or lips?
No, if you want it to be.
Okay.
Yeah, that wasn't intended, but if you want it to be. It's probably more likely to be a stab. Because I do lots of stabs. But, yeah.
Karen?
about looking at the night sky. And then, then there was this period of fusion, abundance with the beads and so much, and the bright, the hot pink and the yellow and red and orange textiles cascading. It's obvious that in this body of work, that it's about grief. And I really appreciate the way that you're more parsimonious in this work. You've edited things out. It's not, and so that allows me personally to take it in. So I really appreciate that this work in many ways is it's you've edited yourself. It's more sparse, and so and the direction is kind of completely different from the bees and the brightness. I'm fascinated. I also really kind of sat up and became really attentive with the broken china in the plates, and you can see that in that painting. And I'm intrigued by the mark making, the X's. I know that I guess that is for sutures but those sorts of marks are historic. I mean, you could extrapolate and all sorts, and I'm going to leave here thinking about the mark making.
And thank you, because mark making is, I think, one of the things that is most important to me in what I do. I'm always thinking of the mark making in the vocabulary. I think of mark making as the vocabulary of the visual artist. And the more words that I have, the more expressive I could be in a poem. The greater my vocabulary, the greater my capacity for expression within a piece of poetry I'm creating. So the greater my vocabulary of mark, the more expressive I can be within the visual art piece that I am making. And so the X's that you're talking about are really open. They are the sutures, but they are also little wounds, and they are also strike marks, and they are also a tally of days, and they are also a numbering of any number of different things.
Right.
And sometimes two of them wander off by themselves and become chromosomal, because I deal so much with mothers and daughters and sisters and nieces, and they really do lend themselves. Like the X is so simple, but they're the denial and they're an acceptance at the same time. I like duality of things. I really like duality of
And in
things.
the lithographs, especially with the ropes and the scissors, there's no noose, but the scissors sort of are a stand-in. I mean, it's just very interesting.
Yeah, and so the scissors are trying to cut themselves out of where they're stuck. And so the rope nuance, I like nuance. The ropes and the strings, they are the things that entangle and hold you in place and keep you trapped, but they're also the ties that tie you to the people and the places and the things that you come from. And so how do you hold on to and let go at the same time? How did we get out of this? But how do I hold on to it at the same time? Can I keep
It
it?
could be voluntary or involuntary.
And both at the same time. All of it.
Tying
Yeah,
ropes.
absolutely. And cutting yourself free. And who came to the opening? Who came to the reception? Okay? At the reception, you met my youngest daughter, Phoebe, who came up to you and offered you a cat's cradle cord and offered you a pair of stork scissors with which to cut it for yourself. And all of those were very intentional choices. And she, if you were speaking with her and you asked her to cut it for you, she told you, no, you take the scissors and you cut it for yourself. And so we were able to create a participatory scenario, I guess in a way it was a little bit performative, where you measured yourself a length of red cord and then used the stork scissors to cut it from the spool that it came from, and then were called to engage in a two-player game that most people said to me, I haven't done this in 50 years, 40 years, 20 years, 30 years, but 5 or 10 minutes later we're passing the figure back and forth with the people around them because it was so ingrained. And I wondered if anybody noticed even that they were cutting themselves, if they were cutting their cord loose with that same imagery around the room.
Phoebe,
Saying no. Phoebe saying no was so very different than Adrian saying no.
Yeah.
So much sweeter. She didn't really tell you that you couldn't. She suggested that you might want to cut your own length. She was so subtle and so sweet, so different from Adrian.
So different for me. And I just want to add too, though, that for the past weeks since the opening, my girls have been obsessed with Cat's Cradle, and they have been carrying the loop of string to school with them and teaching their friends on the playground how to pass the figures. Yeah, so, but that you guys all were cutting yourselves free and then tangling yourselves back up again. And I didn't tell you what's in there.
Any additional questions? Well, I encourage you to talk to each other and talk to Adrian and stick around for a minute, eat up the remaining vittles. And thank you for coming and supporting the work that we're doing here.
And there are unframed impressions of all of the prints available if you'd like to inquire with Michaela.
and all of the work is available. It's really reasonably priced. And the show's been extended through May 30th, so there's time to come back and see it. Of course, you can always come see me anytime.